Hey, I'm with me today, Christopher, and Christopher and I met through another mutual friend of ours. I had the pleasure of sitting down and talking to you and learning more about your story. And I'm excited that you're here to share it with others because it's different, right? Everybody has a different story. We need to get it out there, right? So others know that they're not alone. They can kind of go through it as well. And so, Christopher, uh, you decided to jump on the podcast. You're also a part of the book that's going to come out, chapter 10. So I'm excited to have you share something inside of that book as well. And that's going to link to the podcast episode. But let's start off, Christopher. Who are you today? What are you focusing on right now at the moment?
Today, I'm a storyteller living in the story a storyteller living the story I'm currently writing. As a fire survivor from the Eaton Canyon fire, I am, I have a sense of who I am, I think, but there is an ego death that came with the fire, with losing not just the house, but all of our possessions. And I know we think of possessions as just things, but these are things that we have relationships with when we consider like the entire inventory of things that are in our house. So, you know, awards that we've gotten, special, things that were given to me by special people on special occasions and things like that. Losing all of those things is like losing a bunch of relationships. And it leaves a lot of little holes that you discover right along the way. You're in the mall and you look at something and you remember that you no longer have that. There's a hole there you didn't know that it was there 5 minutes before.
So let's go back real quick. What's the Eaton Canyon? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's known as the Eden Fire. We name everything. Every
Yeah.
disaster gets a name.
And what is that then? What was this?
So on January 7th of 2025, two fires raged through California, one in Pacific Palisades, known as the Palisades Fire, and one that started in what's known as Eaton Canyon, a wilderness area that we lived about a mile away from. And Eaton, between the two fires that burned simultaneously, 9,000 structures were lost.
Hmm, that's a lot.
Yeah,
So like a town? I mean, like
two cities.
two cities. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. And I probably saw some of this on the news. I just want to make sure whoever's listening, knows what we're talking about.
Mhm.
Um, so you lost a lot of possessions, right?
Yeah.
And so that's to me, that's memories, right? And
Yeah.
so like, how does that feel?
There are stages to this. There was definitely grief. The grief is still there. Um, there is a sense of trying to remember who I was so that so I can use that to build who I need to be. Because the rebuilding process is turning to be quite a challenge.
And so when you say the rebuilding, is that the rebuilding of the house?
It's literally the rebuilding of the house, but also the rebuilding of who I am as a creator, as a fiction author, as a fine artist, musician, and transformational coach. I mean, did I lost all my journals.
Mm.
I lost all my sketchbooks. I lost just under 80 pieces of art. Uh, Lost all my notes. Like I had journals, like I had like literally like written out workshops and things like that. All of that is gone. So I am re piecing back together like every little aspect of who I was, what my identity was, regarding my purpose in life.
So you're starting from scratch, basically. Yeah, yes and no. All right.
Yes, most definitely.
Yeah. So how did you start picking up the pieces? Like after that, I'm sure this is still a process, right? But how did you
Yeah.
start this?
This is going to sound strange, but luckily I've been through multiple traumas in life, not this big,
Mm.
but going through the previous ones, I understood that I had the capacity, like immediately following the fire, I had the capacity to not feel anything yet, to not sit in shock or anything like that. With so many homes destroyed in the fire, it was imperative that we find a place to live like fast. I mean, we had a housing shortage in California before the fire. Now that we're talking losing 9,000 additional structures, it's like a free for all. So it's a race to hurry up, find a place to live, and not just before other people take it, but before the landlords increase the rents. Um, there's just a whole lot of things going down on the ground level. Um, by understanding that, it allowed me to act quickly and decisively. And it also helped that I understand storytelling well enough to know this is now the arc of what my life is. So I understood that as thinking of me as a character in my own story, as of the discovering that our house burned down, I was in what's known as the crone arc, which means, which is an internal arc. So, along with all the physical things that need to happen, like finding a place to live and trying to figure out, how do I meet all my obligations and do all this new stuff, trying to reestablish ourselves and get aid and things like that. Uh, the real battle I understood from the very beginning was internal. How well I fix what's happening internally for me will dictate it my ability to step back into happiness and joy and that part of life.
Yeah, so you worked on yourself internally, and again, this is ongoing, right? And I'm sure it's
Yeah.
still something. Yeah. What action did you take to start working on yourself internally?
That's been ongoing. So I was raised from the age of 5 to 10 in the home of an abusive father that was not just physically abusive, he was emotionally and psychologically abusive. And I had the rare experience of having an abuser that was so proud of what he was able to do in dismantling people psychologically that when we would be out in town, let's say we would be sitting in a waiting room and my dad would just start talking to someone and the person wouldn't realize it, but my dad would first question to kind of get a sense of where the chinks were in their armor, and then he would just start sticking knives in. And people never understood what was happening. I mean, you could see them starting to feel their self-esteem deteriorate. You could just watch this stuff happening, but they didn't realize what was happening because he was so subtle at it. Then, on the way home from wherever we were at, he would explain to me what he was doing. So it was like the abuse was training the anger in me, and him educating me on the psychological warfare he was waging on anyone he was in the room with was teaching me how to bite. To recover from that, the courts took me out of his house when I was 10 years old. My mom picked me up, and as we're going down the street, and I'm thinking, like, kind of, there's a part of me is thinking, I'm free. And she warned me that if I did anything to disrupt her relationship with my stepfather, I was going to go back to my dad. To like set the tone really fast. And it didn't help that I was in massive PTSD. And I moved back to a neighborhood where I knew kids. I'd like grown up there from the age, well, from birth all the way to about 8, 9 years old, but I wouldn't leave the house. I left like for school and came home right after. I didn't really engage with people. I just kind of sat around the house and watched TV. And at some point I'd asked for therapy and she said no. You know, in her mind, if I had gone to a therapist, they would blame her, and she wasn't going to, quote unquote, pay someone else to blame her. About the age of 12, it occurred to me that all of the psychological mechanics that my dad had taught me to tear other people down, I could reverse engineer to start building myself back up. That was when the self work began and worked well enough at the age 14. I found the guitar, started playing music, and that was literally the first time in my life I saw a future for myself. Like prior to that, and basically it was just jail and or death was all I could see for myself as an adult.
Hmm. So what did you do to turn things around from what your father was sharing with you? How'd you flip that?
What he didn't count on is I was an extremely, well, still am an extremely sensitive person. I am deep feeling. And but instead of it causing me to crumble, and I'm sure you've probably heard this before, that like really sensitive people, they either survive really well or they just don't make it. And he didn't consider that along with that sensitivity was a certain willpower that as I was watching people around me, I was watching so much pain and experiencing so much pain that it I I have a visceral negative reaction to that kind of behavior. So it was really finding myself, understanding who I am and who I want to be. And it, in a way, it helped that neither of my parents really bonded with me, that I didn't have to, there was never an option to behave in a way that they would be proud of me. So without that, I was free to just be who I chose to be and develop the values I thought were important in the world or in my life.
Yeah. So you navigated through all that back then, and that led
Mhm.
you to being creative today, right? And doing all this
Yep.
stuff with art, music, and everything else. And if I remember correctly, you want to help people, right, with the
Mhm.
stories and everything and get that out there. So you're getting it yourself out there, right? And so
Yeah.
you want to bring people in and share, what they have going on. And so what are you hoping to get out of that? When somebody comes on, talks to you, are you trying to get them to share their stories so it
Yeah.
can make them feel better and become a better person?
And to give them the tools
Hmm.
to take charge of their own life. It was a big difference for me to be able to have the choice to look internally and use my heart as a compass for where I directed my life by helping other people do the same and live within their own personal truths. My hope is to use my light to help light others, and then the light that they take out into the world will affect others. So essentially, it's like an exponential push against the darkness in the world.
So let's go through an example here, right?
Yeah.
Somebody approaches you and you guys are talking, you're trying to get the story. What's that look like?
A couple weeks ago, I was on a call with a gentleman that was helping me with marketing for my music. While he was giving me, like, I was telling him the things that I'm trying to achieve with it is my music is tied in with my fiction writing and with the fine art. Like all of those things are mixed up in the story world in my fiction writing. So as he was giving me his ideas, we kind of the conversation kind of morphed a little bit so that by the end, he had made a comment, kind of an offhand thing, how people say self-deprecating things. And it prompted me to kind of remind him that the examples he gave me, the insights he gave me were part of his personal genius. It was not the kind of answers I would have gotten from anybody else in the world. It was very unique to him. And he walked away from that. Like I could see the difference in just his countenance, the relax, his face muscles relaxing. And he left that call feeling better than when he first signed on, about himself, at least.
Hmm. So it's just talking it out.
A lot of times it's talking it out,
Yeah.
and other times, depending on what's going on in someone's life, sometimes it goes a little deeper.
Mhm.
Like,
So like that was just one phone call, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Right. So there's several times where somebody might have to have more than one, I would think.
yeah, yeah. Well, with coaching clients, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how extensive is that? Like, is that somebody that dealt with a lot of trauma or something? They're trying to figure out who they are. Like, for example,
Mhm.
I wound up, losing my job after 20 years and went through a divorce and was told the word divorce in the same year and had to navigate through all that. Right. So
Yeah.
I had to reach out to people I never would have spoken to before. And if I didn't, I don't know where I would be. Right. I,
Mhm.
things just happen. Right. So and it took me time. So for somebody to reach out to you, like what would it, what would they, I guess what for me, what was the push, right? What is the reason I'm trying to reach out? Why am I trying to become better? Why I'm trying to search for who am I? Right? Because after I lost everything, I had to find out who it was. Like and I'm sure you can share this, right? How does people how do you really find out who you are, who you're meant to be? Because we get stuck. We get stuck in this world where we have to do this mundane thing all the time, and that's not who we're created to be. And so, how does somebody like navigate that? How do they get out of that? What's the push to get them in to get the help that they need from you, Christopher?
The easiest way to think of it is when someone needs to reinvent themselves. Now, that can look like divorce, it can look like surviving a natural disaster, but the most recent case, it looks like someone whose business is starting to constrict, like the current economic market is forcing him to reevaluate who he is inside of his business and who he needs to become, what he needs to do to keep that business viable in the current economic climate.
Yeah. I yeah, so we're just searching, right? We're trying to figure out the answers for who we're supposed to be.
Yeah. And honestly, so I can actually break this down for those that don't need like a lot of guidance.
Mhm.
Like on a high level, looking at this in the lens of a story, there's the life you had, what they call the regular world, which is like the beginning of a movie when you see what the person's life is like before something bad happens. We refer to as the inciting incident. So in my case, it was the fire. It was an inciting incident, changed everything. The first thing I did is I looked back to the first or the most resonant major negative event in my life and considered, what did that teach me about the world and about my place in the world? Because it taught me a lie. Every single negative experience we have, especially if it's traumatic, it teaches you certain things you need to know to survive, but it also teaches you lies about yourself. After I had that figured out, I pinpointed the part in my life that resonates with what I was going through then. Next thing I do is look for the exact opposite. So what is the brightest moment that I had that's resonating with me, like right then and right there? And what truth did that tell me about the world and about my place in the world? When you take those two stories and you evaluate them within the context of each other, you come to what's known in storytelling as the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul is where the protagonist understands the problem in a new way. So if you think of the worst thing that happened to you that resonates and the best thing that happened to you that resonates, there's this emotional algorithm that's taking place between those two things. And when you understand the context of them, the answer on how or where you need the direction you need to go next is literally in there.
Hmm.
And then it's you go into the emergence where you start taking action and you start testing what you think is the answer out in the world. And no one is ever, unless with the exception of exceptionally lucky people, you're going to fail some, just like in every story. You don't just go out there and win, but you keep going, you keep pressing. That's the emergence until eventually you come home. And that's the moment where where you feel a little bit more settled in this next version of yourself.
Interesting. I love it. I love this. So what about if you fall backwards, right? You're trying to navigate through this and now you're just going to depression or whatever because you think that you're going to get to that next level, a better version, but you just don't get there, right? Or you don't get there yet. So you're kind of like depressed. So what do you do then?
If all else fails, go watch a Rocky movie. And that very last fight in the movie, if you don't want to watch the whole movie, just go to the very last fight of the movie. And in every single movie, there's a point where it looks like he's going to lose. All hope is lost. But somehow he digs in just enough to get past that obstacle. And I think that's really why it's so important. I mentioned before how I understood that my character arc or life arc was the crone stage. Uh, this is why it was very important for me to understand that the work needs to be internal. So if we go back to using Rocky as an example, that movie is really about his internal battle. If you pay attention, the whole movie, people are telling him he's a bum. You're a bum, Rocky, you're a bum. And he's hearing this from everyone, from the guy that trains him to random people on the street. The whole movie, he's trying to prove to himself that he is not a bum, that he can quote unquote go the distance. So by understanding that the real work is internal rather than external, helps you understand whether you're actually winning or not. Because if you think of Rocky in terms of this being the hero's journey that people talk about so much, that's an external problem that's facing an external dragon. If you look at it in terms of that, he lost. He didn't win that bout. But what he did do, he went the distance. And that is why at the end of the movie, you feel so uplifted because whether you understood it or not, you were on that same journey with him with that internal work to feel like you have value to take up space in the world.
Now I have to go watch it. It's so funny. And, I'm not too far from Philly, but um no, I agree with you. Like that's what it takes, right? And you saying this reminds me how, people say that, when a storm comes, the cows just lay there, but a buffalo walks through the storm, right? And so that kind of goes with what you're sharing here.
Yeah.
So you just have the power and strength and courage and just keep moving forward. Um, and so, to add on top of that is
Yeah.
like to have some people like yourself, Christopher, and other people around you that push you through, right? Because I believe it's not something you could do by yourself all the time, right?
You
So you
you
need
you
somebody
have
behind you. Yeah. And have you had people behind you?
every step of the way.
Yeah.
That has been one of the blessings about this. I tech a friend of mine, she actually said the same thing that I felt. She articulated it verbally, though. I just kept it inside. But how we've been treated since the fire by our friends, people we've worked with, it felt like experiencing how people would have eulogized us if we had died.
Mm.
So in a way, we are now like walking through the world feeling like we know what the people around us will say at our funeral. And they have been exceptionally kind. It's like above and beyond. I had friends like right after the fire that helped, gave us money that allowed us to like buy things that we needed. And they put off paying bills to do that. So yeah, and that's honestly, that's part of the reason why I feel so compelled when I see a light in someone to verbalize that, because it's impossible for me to know what a person's going through. And just trusting that if I do it enough, somewhere out there, it made a difference in someone's day in a positive way.
Yeah, that's what this is all about, right? Changing lives. I love that. What a big step for the people you knew that helped you out and not, not paying bills and making sure that you were okay. Yeah.
It was so here's how significant that is. The way my childhood trained me prior to the fire, my whole life, I've always paid attention to where homeless people had their encampments, because I understood, like in my bones, understood that if life hit me hard enough, I would be homeless. And it would be good for me at that, right, to walk into homelessness having a sense of, okay, well, there's a camp that's, over here. So all I got to do is like walk over there and, try and find a way to assimilate. We never, after the fire, we were invited into a friend's house the first night. And then we spent the rest of the time until we found an apartment with my stepmother. For me, that completely obliterated the thought that if worse came to worse, I would be left out in the cold trying to figure out where to live.
Yeah. It gave you hope, right?
Immensely.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a great story that you had there. And I know you're always working on yourself. You're always working to improve and help others in so many ways. Christopher, how does somebody reach out to you, connect with you so that you can help them find out their best version and get them to that level?
Well, you could find me at christopherjwesley.com. And I'm also on social media. You could DM me on Instagram and at Christopher J. Wesley. Those are the easiest ways to reach me.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll put that all in the description and everything so people can find that. So I like to ask everybody one question. So I'm sure you listen to every episode I have, right? So now you know. No, I'm just kidding. Um,
Listen to us. I've listened to some.
did you? All right, good. Yeah, great guest. That's for sure. What are three key things you've learned and used along your journey?
Curate your social life. And by that, I don't just mean your friends. I mean family. Find a way, if you can't cut the negative people out that are pulling you down, find a way to mitigate that. Whether you bring a support person with you when you interact with them, just find a way to build yourself back up as quickly as possible after contact with them. Uh, Second thing, always know that you have never arrived. And anyone that appears like they've arrived, that is just an appearance. Third thing, understand that when you shine, you give other people permission to shine too. So by stepping into your personal genius, that's not selfish. It is actually helping someone else out in the world. You just don't see it.
Yeah, I think you shared a lot of that with the story you told us throughout the podcast episode here. No, these are all great. I wrote them all down, so I'm gonna definitely, go back through this and listen to this again for sure. But Christopher, I appreciate you sharing your journey, and I appreciate you being part of the book, and so you can share more in there, whatever we didn't touch. So, um,
Yeah.
thank you for coming on and sharing everything, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, it has been. Thank you.